Well, you see, bending over backwards, it's the story of the first impressions of a yogi who comes to India to study meditation, to discover Ayurvedic medicine, and to practice a lot of Ashtangayoga in Mysore, which Sri Patavi Joyce. And then, through a lot of events that are told in the book, decides to move to India and gets used to the different lifestyle that is what India has to offer to someone who comes from the West. But then the sequel of Bending Over Backwards, Mapile, goes more into details of someone like me who 10 years ago, in 2010, came to India, and how I adapted and got adjusted, and how I Indianized. So I think Bending Over Backwards, in the second part, of course, of the book, shows India through the eyes of someone who had idealized India, and how myself, gets used to some reality checks about India, but in the meanwhile is quite enamored with the country. Whereas in Mapile, I think there is a more wise and adult vision of someone who has spent 10 years in India. So Bending Over Backwards is the beginning. There's someone who does yoga, whereas Mapile tells the story of being in India, living near a fisherman village in Tamil Nadu.
I would like to read something. Bending Over Backwards is a story that begins with a broken man looking for a cure, traveling around the globe, and ends up in India, seeking the truth but finding love instead. So what love are you referring to over here in these lines? These lines were from your interview which I had read. So what is that love element which you are referring to?
Well, yes, it's a question that gets asked a lot, because of course both in Mapile and in Bending Over Backwards, Mapile has been described as an act of love somehow, and Bending Over Backwards reveals at the end of the book what this love is about. Love. I mean, I'm thinking of the Divine Comedy, or I'm thinking of, for example, of Dante Alighieri, who had a beautiful story before he wrote the Divine Comedy about his love for Beatrice. When he was 9 years old, he had a little sweetheart. He was in love with Beatrice. But he wrote some of the most beautiful first poetry in Italian about Beatrice, which was about a boy in love with a girl, but was also about the fact that a woman, or the object of love, let's say, can be also a symbol of our desire to achieve knowledge. So in a way, my love that I discovered for a person in India turned out to be the love that then I developed for India. So it was through the heart, I suppose, that the passion for the country and for its history and for its not its philosophy, because I was already in love with Indian philosophy, of course, having meditated before coming to India. But I think that it was the love for the person that opened up the love for the tradition, the culture of the nation where I then moved to. So let's say that I don't want to be reductive by just saying that, there is obviously a love story, and it has some very uncanny aspect to it, if readers of Bending Over Backwards can discover toward the end of the book, because it has to deal with a past life experience that I go through at the end of the book, in which I see someone who then turns out to be someone I will meet very shortly after and fall in love with. So I think that's the love we're talking about. But in the beginning of the book, of course, there's just a need for some sort of truth that I'm looking for in India, and instead of truth, I found love.
In India, you explored the relationship between technology and spirituality. Can you elucidate more on this?
Yes, well, the whole book starts somewhat in Italy, where I try to find a cure for my bad posture that gives me pain for my back. Then I go to Colorado and I do some regular things like Ashtangayoga and Rolfing massages. But then I arrive in Los Angeles, in Venice Beach, and I'm invited at some lady's house with a friend of mine. And she gives me a quantum biofeedback. She hooks up some sort of sensors to my wrists and to my head and to my chest and to my legs, and sort of takes a karmic photograph and tells me that the problem with my chronic backache, it's not because I stand all crooked when I'm writing, but it's because I committed a social crime in a prior incarnation in 1650. And so it was like, so I feel like kind of relieved because I was very, from a very secular atheist point of view. I get very fascinated by both the concept of the soul existing, but more importantly, the possibility that a machine could actually read it and could actually photograph it and could actually understand things about it. Of course, I'm quite skeptical about it, but I'm respectful of what I'm experiencing. And so I begin then to put together the two searches, the journey to the end of the world, to search for a cure for a chronic backache, together with the investigation of a possible relationship between technology and spirituality, which in a way it's a request for a dialogue to open between science and irrationality, because I have the impression that, and I explain it in the book in several ways, that there is really something to be useful, to be found that it's useful for humanity in an irrational event that we, aside from the placebo effect, and the science should actually look at it with some sort of patience, I suppose, instead of dismissing everything as being charlatanery. Of course, there are a lot of charlatans in the realm of spirituality, but there are also a lot of things that work. And so I think what I try to invite people to do with this book is to study and to open the bridge between science and irrationality, because there's something to be gained for humanity.
So do you really think India holds the secret to fix broken bodies?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. India holds many secrets, of course. I think that in the eyes of many Westerners, India is the land of fatalism, which is a huge mistake, of course, because there's a confusion between non-attachment in the Vedic philosophy and fatalism. It's quite different concepts. So I think that, like clearing some of those mistakes already opens the door to understanding, that what it means to pursue your dharma and to accept that. And then you discover that India actually is teaching you, as I discovered, I think, in Bending Over Backwards, a lesson of resilience and of determination. I mean, I personally, through Bending Over Backwards and through my experience in documenting that book and my experience in India, I found more, rather than the secret of fixing broken bodies, more of a spiritual and disciplinary route in finding a way to get rid of wrong habits, which are clearly not good for your health, and find a discipline that will put you back, like yoga, for example, meditation, and other disciplines that can put you back in a path to you fixing your own broken body. So it's not India that does it, but India can teach to you, not just in the official way of the yoga schools and all that, but as I argue, both in Mapile and in Bending Over Backwards, it is the country itself that is constantly giving you a lesson, like a lesson in patience, for example, which is one of the other great virtues that I think I learned by living in India for so long. So that's like, you learn to be patient, be calmer, be more disciplined, then your body will lose all those habits that are sometimes informed in your body, the form that your body is put in, by some sort of neurosis, which is kind of feeding on your ambitions and on a lot of wrong mental construct.
My last question is, since you're a foreigner who came to India, your one thing which you liked about India and one thing you didn't like so much about India?
Oh, yes. Well, in Mapile, there's a long list. I mean, let's say that, of course, I think one of the major problems that Italy and India, the country where I'm from, Italy, even though I've lived in America for a long time as well, and around the world, Latin America, also I feel like I am also the product of all the places where I lived in. But I think one of the things that Italy and India share as a problem, which is very, very difficult to uproot, is corruption. So that is something that I find it's really at the root of the problem of both our countries in getting better. We saw this now with recently with the coronavirus crisis. There are reports of the mafia distributing food and already to poor people. So that's how it keeps its hold on the population there. I mean, I'm using Italy so that it's understood that I know what I'm talking about because I've lived in countries like Mexico and Latin America where there are similar issues. So I think that's the main problem that I think finding a new ethical way to be with each other. And it's difficult to impose it by law. It requires a very radical change in society. I'm not hopeful that it can be done within my lifetime, but I just know that is the one thing I wish that both our countries get over, because I know it's so ingrained in our culture, but I do think it's a big problem. And then, I mean, like I said, these books are a homage of my passion for India. So I think there are so many things. Like I said, definitely discipline is the one thing that I learned in 2008 when I first came. Later on, patience, I suppose. There is also, let's just say I speak as a Southern Indian. I'm an OCI, so I'm an adopted Southern Indian, an adopted Tamil, even though I don't speak Tamil very well. But I do have to say something specific about the south of India, which is often ignored in the north of India, which is there is a certain sweetness and a certain languor in the people there that I find that I miss when I'm away, because it relaxes you, it's very pleasant, it's very polite in a way, and I find that sweetness is one of the most adorable things for me. And I know it's rough, I know there are horrible things happening too, but in general, beyond that, I am very aware of the difficulties and the inequalities that are there. But in general, the form is important, and the way that people are kind and most of the time and strong and facing difficulties with a smile, for me, it's an incredible lesson that I always carry with me whenever I'm away from India.
Okay.
In the shadow of the cypress tree, I stumbled in its tangled roots, surrounded by the tree's forgotten leaves. My knees were bloodied, hands